For the 3 years I was with Mark, I was absolutely convinced I had found the love of my life. He was charming, attentive, employed at a top-tier financial firm, and seemed to be everything I had ever wanted in a partner. We met at a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday, and from that moment on, I thought I was living in a modern fairy tale. But looking back with the clarity that only distance can provide, there was always a dark, sprawling, perfectly manicured, passive-aggressive shadow looming over our entire relationship. That shadow was named Beatrice. Beatrice was Mark's mother, a woman who treated her entire life like a high-stakes stage play, where she was the undisputed director, the shining star, and the vicious chief critic. She was a wealthy, generational money, image-obsessed socialite who viewed anyone outside of her immediate tax bracket and zip code with a mixture of profound pity and thinly veiled disgust. I, being a dedicated public middle school teacher raised by a hardworking single mother in a modest suburb, fell squarely into the category of people Beatrice firmly believed were hopelessly beneath her family's station. From the very beginning, the very first dinner I attended at her sprawling estate, she made it her personal mission to relentlessly remind me of my place. It started with small, deniable jabs that were designed to make me feel small. There were backhanded compliments about my clothes. "Oh, Julianne, how wonderfully brave of you to wear synthetic blends. They just look so practical." There was the heavy, theatrical sighing whenever I mispronounced a French item on an expensive wine menu. There was the constant, deliberate name-dropping of Mark's ex-girlfriend, a corporate lawyer whose family, conveniently, owned a massive summer home right next to theirs in the Hamptons. Beatrice would always reminisce about how refined she was, looking pointedly at me as I ate my salad. Through all of this psychological warfare, Mark played the role of the oblivious peacemaker. Whenever she insulted me, he would reach under the heavy mahogany dinner table, squeeze my hand, whisper that his mother just takes a long time to warm up to new people, and beg me with his big, earnest eyes not to cause a scene. Because I loved him deeply, and because I desperately wanted to build a family with him, I swallowed my pride. I smiled tightly through the endless insults. I let myself be slowly diminished in the name of keeping the peace. When Mark finally proposed to me on a beautiful autumn evening in the city, I naively thought things might finally change. I thought that putting a diamond ring on my finger would solidify my permanent place in his life and force Beatrice to finally, begrudgingly accept me as her daughter-in-law. I was catastrophically wrong. The engagement didn't signal my acceptance into the family. It merely signaled the beginning of Beatrice's hostile, aggressive takeover of our wedding. Every single decision I made was subjected to a grueling, exhausting inquisition. If I suggested a rustic, romantic barn wedding, she told me the idea was dangerously pedestrian and smelled of livestock. If I wanted a fun buffet-style dinner so guests could mingle, she acted as though I was trying to poison her wealthy country club friends with cheap trough food. Eventually, using the excuse that she was generously paying for the venue and the catering, she bulldozed every preference I had. The wedding became a black-tie gala at an elite historic mansion, completely stripping away any trace of my personality. But I told myself it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the dress. That was my domain. That was the one battleground where I swore I would hold my ground, and it was the place where our Cold War finally went nuclear. I had been saving up for my dream wedding dress since before I even met Mark. I had a very specific, beautiful vision, a sleek, modern, incredibly fitted silk crepe gown with a plunging but tasteful neckline, long, elegant sleeves, and a dramatic, sweeping train. It was elegant, sophisticated, and entirely me. When the day finally came to go dress shopping, I brought my 2 best friends, my mother, and in a foolish, desperate attempt to extend a final olive branch, I invited Beatrice. The moment I stepped out of the velvet-fitting room, in my dream dress, the entire room went silent in the best way possible. My friends gasped, their hands covering their mouths. My mother instantly started crying, telling me I looked like a queen. I looked in the massive floor-to-ceiling mirror and felt, for the first time in my entire life, undeniably, fiercely beautiful. But Beatrice just sat in the plush velvet armchair in the corner of the boutique, sipping her complimentary champagne, her face pinched into an expression of severe, sour distaste. She looked me up and down slowly, deliberately, and announced, loud enough for the other brides and consultants in the entire store to hear, that the dress was vulgar. She claimed it was far too revealing, entirely inappropriate for a church setting, even though we weren't getting married in a church, and lacked the regal modesty required to marry into the prestigious Sterling family line. She then snapped her fingers at the bridal consultant and forced her to drag out the dress she had pre-selected for me. It was a nightmare. It was a hideous, stiff, overly modest ball gown that looked like it had been salvaged from a dusty 1980s theatrical production of a bad Shakespeare play. It had a high, scratchy lace neckline that literally choked me, massive, overwhelming, puffy sleeves that swallowed my arms, and a skirt so incredibly heavy with crinoline I could barely walk without tripping over myself. It wasn't just ugly, it was physically suffocating. It was a dress designed to hide a woman, to swallow her up, to make her disappear. I looked in the mirror and felt like a clown. I politely but firmly refused to even consider it. I marched back to the dressing room, took it off, put my silk crepe dream dress back on, and bought it with my own hard-earned savings right then and there. I ignored Beatrice's dramatic, heavy sighs, her muttering about new money trash, and the suffocating icy silence that followed us all the way to the boutique's parking lot. That should have been the end of it. The dress was bought, the alterations were scheduled, and the matter was supposed to be closed. But Beatrice was a woman who never, ever lost a war of attrition. Over the next 6 long months, she made relentless, disparaging comments about my dress at every opportunity. She secretly tried to bribe my tailor to add an unwanted modesty panel to the chest. She offered to buy me an entirely new, $20,000 designer gown if I would just reconsider my vulgar choice. When I held my ground and refused to engage, she abruptly, chillingly changed her tactics. A week before the wedding, Beatrice suddenly became sickeningly sweet. She called me, her voice dripping with fake honey, and apologized for her past behavior. She claimed she was just overly stressed about the complex wedding logistics and desperately wanted everything to be absolutely perfect for her darling sus and his beautiful bride. The wedding was taking place at a sprawling, historic venue just 2 miles from Beatrice's massive, heavily secured estate. Since my tiny, cramped apartment was over an hour away, she generously offered to store my wedding dress in her climate-controlled, walk-in cedar closet for the week to keep it safe from my cat. Furthermore, she insisted on paying her personal, high-end dry cleaner to hand steam and prep the delicate silk dress the morning of the wedding, so I wouldn't have to worry about a single wrinkle on my big day. I was highly suspicious. Every alarm bell in my body was ringing, but Mark begged me to accept the offer. He framed it as a massive, miraculous breakthrough in our relationship. "She's trying, Julianne," he pleaded, grabbing my hands and looking at me with those earnest eyes I had fallen so deep in love with. "She's trying to do something genuinely nice for you. Please just let her do this one thing. It will make the whole weekend go so much smoother, and it proves she finally accepts you." Against every screaming instinct in my gut, against the warnings of my mother, I agreed. I zipped up the opaque, heavy canvas garment bag containing the most expensive piece of clothing I had ever owned, handed it to Beatrice's driver, and effectively handed my mortal enemy the keys to my sanity. The morning of the wedding was a glorious, chaotic whirlwind of popping champagne corks, hairspray clouds, and nervous, bubbling excitement. I was in the luxurious bridal suite at the venue with my 6 bridesmaids and my mother, having our hair and makeup professionally done by a team I had hired. The room was buzzing with laughter, 90s pop music, and the overwhelming feeling of joy. At 11 a.m., exactly on schedule, Beatrice's personal assistant knocked on the heavy wooden door and delivered the opaque canvas garment bag. She smiled brightly, told me the steaming went perfectly, hung the bag carefully on the brass hook in the corner of the suite, and left without another word. I didn't think twice about it. I was far too caught up in the magic of the morning. It wasn't until 1 p.m., exactly 2 hours before I was scheduled to walk down the grand staircase and down the aisle in front of 250 wealthy guests that my photographer asked me to get dressed so we could take the vital bridal portraits. I stood in the center of the room in my silk getting ready robe. My mother unzipped the heavy garment bag while my bridesmaids gathered around in a semi-V circle, with their phones ready to capture the emotional moment I saw my dress. The sound my mother made was something between a gasp, a choke, and a scream. The joyful musical chatter in the room instantly evaporated, sucked out into a vacuum, replaced by a stunned, heavy, terrifying silence. I turned around in my styling chair, the smile freezing and dying on my face. Hanging on the brass hook was not my sleek, modern fitted silk crepe gown. Hanging there was the monstrosity. It was the exact same hideous, stiff, high-necked, puffy-sleeved 1980s ball gown that Beatrice had tried to force me to buy 6 months ago in the boutique. But this wasn't even a high-end designer version. It looked like a shockingly cheap, poorly constructed knockoff ordered from a sketchy overseas website. The lace was scratchy, yellowed, and synthetic. The bodice was adorned with cheap, cloudy plastic rhinestones visibly glued onto the fabric, and the skirt was made of stiff, crinkling tulle that smelled faintly of a Halloween costume shop and mothballs. My brain completely short-circuited. I stared at the plastic rhinestones, my vision blurring, unable to process the reality in front of my eyes. "Where is my dress?" I whispered, my voice sounding incredibly loud and fragile in the dead silent room. "Mom, where is my dress?" My mother frantically ripped the garment bag completely open, checked the bottom of the bag, checked the closet, checked the hallway, frantically asking the venue staff if another bag had been dropped off. Nothing. My maid of honor immediately pulled out her phone and called Beatrice. It went straight to voicemail. She called Mark. Straight to voicemail. The panic in the room escalated from a simmering confusion to an absolute, unmitigated boil. I was hyperventilating, staring at this hideous, suffocating piece of cheap fabric that was essentially a physical, mocking manifestation of my future mother-in-law's absolute, psychotic control over my entire life. 10 agonizing minutes later, the heavy oak door to the bridal suite swung open, and Beatrice walked in. She looked immaculate, practically glowing, wearing a heavily tailored mother-of-the-groom dress that easily cost more than my entire catering budget. She took one slow, deliberate look around the room. She looked at my tear-streaked face, the panicked, furious bridesmaids, and finally, the cheap monstrosity hanging on the hook, and she let out a deeply condescending, theatrical sigh. "Oh, Julianne, please stop the hysterics," she said, her voice dripping with fake, practiced sympathy. "There was a terrible accident at the dry cleaners this morning. The commercial steamer malfunctioned and completely scorched the silk on your dress. It was completely ruined, entirely unwearable, burned right through the bodice. The owner felt absolutely terrible. Luckily, I had anticipated that a delicate, flimsy fabric like that might be a problem, so I took the liberty of purchasing a backup dress for you weeks ago, just in case. It's far more appropriate for the cathedral aesthetic anyway. You should be thanking me, dear. I saved your wedding from being a total disaster." I stared at her, the sheer staggering audacity of her lie paralyzing me. A high-end professional steamer does not spontaneously combust and incinerate a heavy silk gown. And even if a tragedy like that did happen, a normal, sane human being would call the bride immediately. They would rush to the venue to figure out a solution. They would not secretly swap the ruined dress for a cheap costume, hide it in a dark garment bag, and send it to the venue without a word, waiting until 2 hours before the ceremony to let the bomb explode. She hadn't saved my wedding. She had executed a carefully premeditated, calculated hostage situation. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew that with only 2 hours left until the ceremony, and my apartment an hour away, I would have absolutely no choice. I would either have to walk down the aisle in my sweatpants, cancel the wedding and humiliate myself entirely, or put on the hideous, cheap modesty gown and publicly submit to her absolute authority in front of 250 people. It was the ultimate power play. It was her breaking me, forcing me to wear the physical symbol of her dominance. "Where is it?" I demanded, my voice dropping an octave, trembling with a rage so profound, so absolute, that it felt ice cold in my veins. "Where's my real dress, Beatrice?" She waved her hand dismissively, casually examining her perfectly manicured nails. "I told you, it was destroyed beyond repair. It's in the incinerator at the cleaners. Now chop chop, you need to get dressed." The string quartet is already setting up the prelude, and the guests are taking their seats. My mother was shaking with an explosive fury, stepping forward, ready to physically attack Beatrice, but I held up my hand to stop her. I didn't want to scream at Beatrice. Beatrice was a lost cause. She was exactly who I always knew she was. I wanted Mark. I sent my maid of honor to march down the hall and drag Mark out of the groomsman's suite, completely disregarding the bad luck of seeing the bride before the ceremony. 5 minutes later, Mark walked in. He looked incredibly handsome in his custom-tailored tuxedo, his hair perfectly styled, but his face was pale, sweaty, and deeply anxious. He looked at the screaming, palpable tension in the room. He looked at his mother standing smugly in the corner, like a victorious general, and then he looked at the cheap, plastic rhinestone monstrosity hanging limply on the brass hook. "Mark," I said, my voice eerily, unnaturally calm, "your mother stole my wedding dress. She claims it was ruined at the cleaners in some freak accident, but she secretly swapped it for this cheap costume because she hated the one I bought with my own money. I need you to handle this. I need you to demand that she tell us where my dress is right now." Mark swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He looked at his mother. Beatrice didn't say a word. She merely raised one perfectly plucked eyebrow at him, a silent, terrifying, practiced command that conveyed a lifetime of financial threats and emotional manipulation. Mark looked back at me, and in that split second, I saw his spine completely dissolve into dust. I saw 28 years of intense conditioning, deep-seated fear, and financial dependence override every ounce of love he ever claimed to have for me. "Julianne, babe," he stammered, his voice weak, his hand reaching up to rub the back of his neck. A nervous, cowardly habit he had whenever he was about to lie or try to pacify me. "Mom told me about the accident this morning. It's a tragedy, it really is. But the dry cleaner made a mistake. It's not Mom's fault. She really did go out of her way to make sure you had something to wear so the day wasn't completely ruined. And, I mean, look at it. It's just a dress, right? The important thing is the marriage. The important thing is that we're getting married today. We have 250 important guests out there. My boss is out there. The bishop is waiting. Just put it on, okay? We can laugh about this later on the honeymoon. Please, Jules. Let's not cause a huge scene and ruin the whole day." The room went so profoundly quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit. My 6 bridesmaids were staring at Mark with open mouths, utterly appalled by the words coming out of his mouth. My mother looked like she was about to commit a felony on him, but the strangest thing happened to me. I didn't feel angry anymore. The searing, blinding panic that had been suffocating me, crushing my chest for the last 20 minutes, suddenly vanished entirely. It was replaced by an absolute, crystal-clear, frigid clarity that washed over my entire body. I looked at Mark, really truly looked at him for the first time. I looked at the man I had spent 3 years compromising for, the man whose endless excuses I had swallowed, the man I had defended to my frustrated friends when he repeatedly, consistently prioritized his mother's irrational, controlling demands over my basic comfort and dignity. He wasn't a peacemaker. He wasn't a victim of his mother's overbearing nature. He was a coward. He was an active participant in my subjugation. He knew his mother had sabotaged my dress. Based on his terrible acting, he probably knew about the plan days ago. But instead of standing up for his future wife, instead of demanding basic respect, he was asking me to put on a humiliating, scratchy, cheap costume and walk down the aisle looking like a humiliated clown, all just so he wouldn't have to confront his mommy and risk losing his trust fund. He wasn't asking me to wear a dress. He was asking me to wear a collar. He was telling me, explicitly and unequivocally, exactly what the rest of my life was going to look like. Every single major decision we ever made, where we lived, how we bought a house, how we raised our future children, how we spent our holidays, would be subjected to Beatrice's vicious sabotage. And Mark would always be there, standing in the corner, rubbing the back of his neck, telling me to just swallow my pride, put on the costume, and not cause a scene. You knew, I whispered, the realization settling into my bones like heavy lead. You knew she did this, and you let her. I didn't know she swapped it, Mark pleaded, taking a desperate step toward me, his voice pitching higher in a frantic panic. I just knew yours got ruined. Babe, please be reasonable. We are running out of time. The coordinator is knocking on the door. Just put the dress on. It doesn't look that bad from a distance. Just do it for me. Beatrice smiled, a victorious, sickeningly sweet smile that exposed all her teeth. He's right, Julianne. A marriage is about compromise. It's time you learned how to compromise and put the family first. I looked at Beatrice's smug, triumphant face. I looked at Mark's pathetic, pleading, watery eyes. And then I looked at the hideous, cheap dress hanging limply on the brass hook. You're right, Beatrice, I said, my voice carrying a terrifying, absolute calm that echoed in the quiet room. A marriage is about compromise, but I am absolutely, entirely done compromising my dignity. I turned to my styling chair, picked up a wet makeup wipe from the counter, and slowly, deliberately began to wipe off the expensive, flawless professional bridal makeup I had just spent 2 hours getting applied. I wiped off the lipstick. I wiped off the eyeliner. Mark watched me, his eyes widening in massive confusion and growing, uncontrolled panic. Jules, what are you doing? Stop that! The photographer is waiting for the bridal portraits in the garden. I threw the dirty makeup wipe into the trash can. I reached up into my complex updo and carefully, methodically pulled the delicate, pearl-encrusted veil out of my hair, laying it gently on the dressing table. Then, I turned to my mother, who was watching me with tears of absolute fierce pride welling up in her eyes. Mom, I said steadily, without a tremor in my voice, can you get my blue jeans and my gray sweater out of my overnight duffel bag? Julianne, stop it, Mark yelled, his panic finally breaking through his carefully cultivated country club facade, his voice cracking. This isn't funny. You're overreacting. People are out there. My boss is out there. My entire family is waiting. You cannot do this over a stupid piece of fabric. It was never about the fabric, Mark, I replied, taking the folded jeans from my mother and walking toward the private bathroom attached to the suite. It was about the fact that your mother just proved she will stoop to literal psychological warfare to control us, and you just proved that you will gladly hold the door open for her while she does it. I am not marrying into this sick, twisted dynamic. There is no wedding today. You can go tell your boss whatever you want. Beatrice's victorious, smug smile finally shattered, replaced by genuine, pale shock. You wouldn't dare, she hissed, her voice trembling with sudden, terrifying fury as she stepped forward. Do you have any idea how much money I spent on this reception? The imported floral arrangements alone cost more than you make in an entire year of teaching. You will walk out there, Julianne, or I will ruin you. I will make sure you are destroyed. I paused at the bathroom door, looking over my shoulder at the woman who had tormented me for 3 agonizing years. I looked her dead in the eye, feeling absolutely nothing but pity. You can't ruin me, Beatrice, because I don't care about your money, your shallow social circle, or your approval. You spent $80,000 on a massive party for yourself to show off to your friends. I hope you enjoy it. It's a beautiful day for a party. I went into the bathroom, locked the door, stripped off my silk getting ready robe, and pulled on my worn, faded blue jeans, a plain gray knit sweater, and my comfortable, scuffed white sneakers. I looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was still pinned up in an elegant, intricate chignon, but my face was scrubbed clean of makeup, and my eyes were brighter, sharper, and clearer than they had been in 3 long years. The heavy, suffocating weight I had been carrying around since the day Mark proposed was completely gone. I felt incredibly light. I felt like I had just narrowly avoided stepping onto a live landmine. When I unlocked the door and walked back into the bridal suite, it was pure chaos. Mark was sitting on the velvet sofa with his head in his hand, hyperventilating and crying. Beatrice was frantically screaming into her cell phone, viciously threatening the venue coordinator to delay the ceremony. My bridesmaids were already a step ahead of me. They were packing up their bags, kicking off their uncomfortable heels, and pulling their street clothes back on over their dresses. They didn't ask a single question. They didn't hesitate. They formed a tight, protective physical wall around me. "Let's go," my maid of honor said, grabbing my duffel bag and throwing it over her shoulder. I didn't say another word to Mark. I didn't look at his mother. We walked out of the bridal suite, down the grand, thick-carpeted hallway, and straight toward the main lobby of the historic venue. To get to the parking lot, we had to walk past the massive open double doors of the sanctuary, where the guests were already seated, waiting for the string quartet to begin the processional. As I walked past the open doors in my faded jeans, gray sweater and sneakers, surrounded by my friends, heads began to turn. Whispers started rippling through the wooden pews like a wave. I saw Mark's wealthy, judgmental aunts, his arrogant boss, and his country club friends pointing, gasping, and covering their mouths. But I didn't run. I didn't hide my face. I held my head incredibly high, squared my shoulders, looked straight ahead, and walked right out the front doors into the brilliant, cool afternoon sunlight. We piled into my maid of honor's SUV, and she hit the gas, scratching slightly as we left the sprawling venue, the $80,000 disaster, and the Sterling family completely behind us. For the first 10 minutes of the drive down the highway, the car was dead silent. Nobody knew what to say. Then, my mother reached over from the back seat, put her hand firmly on my shoulder, and gave it a tight, reassuring squeeze. I let out a massive, shaky breath that I felt like I had been holding for 3 entire years. And then, I started to laugh. It wasn't a hysterical, broken laugh. It was a deep, joyous, unburdened, belly-shaking laugh. My bridesmaids started laughing too. I laughed until my stomach physically ached and tears streamed down my makeup-free face. I was free. I was finally, truly free. The fallout was spectacular, and I watched it unfold entirely from a safe, peaceful distance. By the time I reached my small apartment, my phone had over 100 missed calls and frantic, angry text messages. Mark's family was utterly, publicly humiliated on an unprecedented scale. When the guests were finally informed that the wedding was abruptly canceled, rumors spread like wildfire through their elite social circles. Some people said I got cold feet and panicked. Others said I ran off with a groomsman. But the truth eventually leaked out, and it leaked out brilliantly. One of my bridesmaids, a fiercely loyal woman who worked in high-level corporate PR and knew exactly how to spin a narrative, quietly told a few key gossips on Mark's side of the family the exact, unvarnished details of the dress swap. She even showed them a crystal-clear picture she had snapped on her phone of the hideous, rhinestoned 1980s monstrosity hanging in the bridal suite. The sheer unhinged cruelty and psychopathic nature of Beatrice's sabotage was far too juicy to keep secret. Within days, the story was everywhere. Beatrice went from the queen of the country club to the ultimate laughingstock. Her friends were horrified by her behavior, viewing her not as a protective mother, but as an absolute monster. As for my real dress, the heartbreaking truth came out a week later. Mark, in a desperate, pathetic attempt to win me back, confessed the whole twisted plot via a rambling, pathetic, 4-page email. There was no steamer accident. The dry cleaner was completely innocent. Beatrice had bribed her personal assistant to go into the cedar closet, take my custom, beautiful silk crepe gown, and donate it to a random, obscure thrift store 3 towns over. She then hung the cheap, plastic rhinestone dress in the canvas bag, fully expecting me to cave to the immense pressure of the ticking clock and the massive crowd. Mark admitted in the email that he found out about the insane plan the night before the wedding. He claimed he begged her not to do it. But Beatrice threatened to entirely cut off his massive trust fund and refused to pay the final $80,000 venue bill if he warned me, which would have legally bankrupted him. He chose his inheritance, his comfort, and his mother over his bride. I never replied to his email. I didn't need to. I packed up the few sweaters, watches, and golf clubs he had left at my apartment in garbage bags, called a courier, and mailed them all back to his mother's heavily gated estate. I took the incredibly expensive, non-refundable tickets for our planned 2-week luxury honeymoon to Greece, paid the exorbitant fee to change the name on the second ticket, and took my hard-working mother instead. We drank incredible wine on the steep cliffs of Santorini, ate fresh seafood caught that morning, and watched the stunning orange sunsets over the Aegean Sea. I didn't shed a single tear mourning the loss of Mark on that trip, because I realized with absolute clarity that I hadn't actually lost a partner. I had lost a warden, and I had narrowly escaped a lifelong prison sentence. It has been 2 wonderful years since that day. I heard through the grapevine that Mark is still single, still living under the iron-fisted, controlling rule of his mother, and still rubbing the back of his neck whenever things get mildly difficult. Beatrice's reputation in her precious country club never fully recovered. People politely smile at her to her face, but they constantly whisper about the stolen dress psycho behind her back. She lost her social standing, the one thing she valued above all else. And me? I am thriving. I am still a dedicated middle school teacher. I still live in my modest, comfortable apartment with my cat, but my life is entirely, peacefully, unapologetically my own. I don't have to constantly apologize for my background, my taste in clothes, or my personal boundaries. I never found out what happened to my beautiful, beloved silk crepe wedding dress. I searched for weeks, but it was gone. However, a part of me really likes to think that some lucky, budget-conscious girl found it on a thrift store rack for $50, put it on in a dingy fitting room, and felt as incredibly beautiful, powerful, and invincible as I did when I first tried it on. I lost a dress, yes, and I lost an $80,000 wedding party. But I kept my absolute pride, I kept my sanity, and most importantly, I kept my soul. And looking back, walking out of that sprawling historic venue, in my faded blue jeans and white sneakers was the most beautiful, empowering, perfect walk down an aisle I could have ever possibly taken.